When House of the Dragon was announced, we were excited to see many of the dragons that we've already seen, like Caraxes, Sunfire, and especially Vermithor. But the one we had our eyes for more than any other was Vhagar. Being the only Targaryen dragon born before Aegon's conquest, Vhagar had seen the family rise to power over 3 centuries and was an integral part of their struggle to maintain control over Westeros. Her fires had helped forge the 7 kingdoms into one major polity, and also burnt dissension against Targaryen rule on multiple occasions. In House of the Dragon, she's on the side with the lesser number of dragons, but her presence itself is enough to make the Blacks plan everything around her. In this video, we're gonna deep dive into Vhagar's anatomy and show you exactly why she's the greatest threat to Rhaenyra's claim to the Iron Throne. So, spoiler alert before you go any farther, because there'll be things in this video from House of the Dragon Season 2 and beyond. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Birth, appearance, and claiming. Vhagar's early years. Vhagar was one of 2 Targaryen dragons to be born to the family following their relocation to Dragonstone. First was Meraxes, the Silver Queen with eyes of gold, born half a century before Aegon the Conqueror was crowned in Oldtown, and for a long time we didn't know what she looked like. Vhagar had been referenced multiple times in Martin's main series as well as its ancillary tales, but unlike Balerion, whose coloring was known throughout the fandom, Vhagar's appearance remained a mystery. People drew many fantastic pieces of fan art based on the speculation of what she might look like. 2021, we finally got a straight answer out of the horse's mouth. For that year's calendar of Ice and Fire, George told artist Sam Hogg that Vhagar's coloring was bronze with greenish blue highlights and bright eyes. This means that her dragon egg must have been prime bronze as well, streaked with bluish green, and so should be the case for her flames. Vhagar's appearance presents an interesting parallel to Dany's 3 dragons from the main series. We know that Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal are meant to be symbolic reincarnations of the Dragon of the Conquest, but they're also kind of literal reincarnations as well. Drogon looks exactly like Balerion from his tail to his horns and his eyes. Viserion isn't exactly like Meraxes, but his cream and gold coloring is more akin to Arax's from House of the Dragon, but the color scheme is still pretty close to Merax's silver and gold. Rhaegal flips Vhagar's coloring, as his body is jade green and his eyes are molten bronze, but that bridge would be gapped in the latter's future. Being the youngest of the Targaryen dragons of her time, we don't exactly know what Vhagar's size was when she was claimed by Visenya Targaryen, but we can venture a semi-educated guess. In A Dance with Dragons, it's mentioned that Drogon's wingspan extends up to 20 feet. George Martin's dragons are fantastical beasts, but he designed them keeping realism in mind. His dragons have reptilian bodies, bat-like wings, and no foreleg. They use hooked claws attached to the arch of their wings to walk on ground, and as such, a dragon's wings are far larger than its body, 3 times as big, according to comments made by Martin in conventions, interviews, and through the mouths of maesters. Drogon had only been alive for 3 years when his wingspan reached that length, and he had only been wild and free for one of them. 20 feet is roughly 7 meters, and going by the rule of thirds, Drogon's actual body itself must have been just over 2 meters. But it reached this size rapidly after leaving Daenerys for a few months, and Vhagar had always had that kind of freedom. It's possible that by the time she was 3 years old, she was far larger than Drogon, considering she grew up close to the flames of the Dragon Mount. She spent over 2 decades riderless, and we can't tell how big she got in that time. We know that she was the smallest of the 3 conquering dragons. Meraxes was the first dragon born on Dragonstone. Her birth took place many years before Vhagar's, presumably. She was closer to Balerion in size, and Vhagar was closer to her in size. The Black Dread had already spent 5 decades on Planetos by the time Vhagar was born, so to claim that she was half his size at the time of the conquest might not be entirely accurate, but it wouldn't be too far off the mark either. Shortly before it, she was claimed by the firstborn child of Lord Aerion Targaryen, Visenya. It is said by some maesters of the Citadel that she visited the Arbor and Casterly Rock with her brother Aegon, and if that's true, neither Valerian would have made those trips without their dragon. This means Vhagar was one of the first dragons to be seen in Westeros alongside Balerion, but while the purpose of those visits isn't recorded, in our headcanon, it could only have been for reconnaissance. This is because towards the end of the Century of Blood, Lord Aegon Targaryen declared his intention of becoming king, and Vhagar became the first dragon to lose its flames upon Westerosi lands. The Dragon's Conquest and the Dragon's Wrath. Vhagar's involvement in Aegon's conquest and beyond. We don't know Vhagar's exact size at the beginning of the conquest. When Tyrion Lannister encounters her skull during one of his early visits to King's Landing, he thinks that her skull was big enough to swallow a horse and its rider whole. That's roughly the size of an aurochs, and this makes sense considering Tyrion saw her skull centuries after her demise. So, at the time of the conquest, Vhagar must have been able to swallow fully grown adults, which was good enough. Her flames were so hot that they would melt the armor off a soldier's flesh and cook him inside before that happened. This was proven when Vhagar became the first Targaryen dragon to actually attack Westerosi lords. When Aegon Targaryen landed on the highest hill near the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, he stayed there and started the construction of a temporary seat of power, while his sisters were sent to subdue the castles closest to those hills, Rosby and Stokeworth. House Rosby surrendered without a fight, but when the defenders of Stokeworth saw Vhagar, they tried to bring her down. Stokeworth men fired crossbow bolts in her direction, and in response to this provocation, Visenya burned the castle's roofs with Vhagar's flames. She didn't go any further than that because she knew she and her siblings needed to restrain themselves as much as possible during this conquest, and so while Vhagar was blooded, she wasn't inspiring any songs about herself just yet. That would change soon enough though, because with the crown lands secure, Aegon turned his attention to the three kingdoms in its immediate vicinity. He sent his sister wife Rhaenys with his hand Orys Baratheon and the bulk of his new armies to the Stormlands. Aegon himself flew to Harrenhal to deal with the king of the Isles and Rivers. Visenya was given the much harder task of invading the Vale of Arryn with the Targaryen fleet. The Stormlands and the Riverlands were relatively easy to access, considering there were no natural defenses that could stop the Targaryen army, but the Vale was a different story. The only entrance into this territory by land was through a range of mountains that had one accessible path. This path was even fortified with a castle called the Bloody Gate, and then the capital of the Vale itself, the Eyrie, was said to be nigh impregnable through conventional means. Situated at the top of a gigantic mountain with 3 way castles guarding the steep and treacherous path to it, the Eyrie was a death sentence for any soldiers not familiar with rock climbing. Considering most of Aegon's new allies had spent their lives on the grassy plains of the Crown Lands, expecting them to risk their lives for an impossible feat was the height of folly. Aegon decided to attack the Vale by sea instead, aiming to take their only city, Gulltown, thereby cutting off their economy and establishing a base for future invasions. He sent Visenya and Vhagar for this difficult mission because he knew his elder sister wife was the more martial of his brides. Vhagar flew alongside the Targaryen fleet under the command of Aegon's master of ships, Daemon Balerion. We don't know how many ships were sent out by Aegon. War galleys can support up to 400 men if you really push their limits. At least half that number will be engaged in pulling the oars. Even if the remaining 200 crew members all fought like soldiers, which is unlikely, that would mean 10 war galleys can hold about 2,000 men between them. Let's say Daemon had twice that number of ships and men at the very least. It still wasn't a match for the ships of the established port city of Gulltown, an army that was pulled together in haste but functioned better as a unit than the Targaryen forces. The Vale's fleet was augmented by 12 warships from Braavos, and the Braavosi were a primarily seafaring people. Their ships were legendary for their speed and resilience, which no doubt was a factor in their victory over the invading Targaryens. The Vale smashed Aegon's fleet and killed his master of ships, but in retaliation, their ships were burnt out of existence by Vhagar. They must have had anywhere between 30 to 50 ships, but all of them were reduced to burnt timber and flesh by the time she was done setting them aflame. The Targaryens suffered a loss at the battle off the waters of Gulltown, but they also defeated an enemy and restricted them to overland defense. Visenya's second visit to the Vale would be far more successful, and was all thanks to her ferocious steed. Queen Regent Shara Arryn shored the Vale's defenses after the Gulltown offensive, but nothing could have prepared her for Vhagar descending upon the inner courtyard of the Eyrie. The Arryn castle might have been impregnable for conventional soldiers, but there wasn't a single mountain in the world that a dragon couldn't scale with its wings. Vhagar caught the eye and imagination of Shara's young son, Ronal, and after he flew 3 times upon her back, the King of the Vale was reduced to being the Lord Paramount of the Vale. Visenya's dragon didn't do a lot from an offensive perspective in this encounter, but Vhagar's size and the mere threat of her dragon flame was enough to dissuade Shara Arryn from trying any funny business. It was the same when Visenya flew her to Crackclaw Point, where she ensured the submission of all its boggy noblemen and bound them in service directly to the Iron Throne. The next time Vhagar made a direct impact in Aegon's conquest was during the Field of Fire, where she, alongside Balerion and Meraxes, burnt 4,000 enemy troops to death and sent 10,000 more back home with severe burns. Following this, Vhagar was put on a bit of a timeout because Aegon took Rhaenys with him for his conquest of Dorne and left Visenya in King's Landing to handle the governance of the realm. She would return to action in furious fashion after Rhaenys' death and burn every castle in Dorne at least once with Balerion by her side, with the exception of Sunspear. By this point, Vhagar's flames had become hot enough to fuse sand into glass, which might not have been at Balerion's stone melting level, but it was still pretty damn lethal. Facing Vhagar by the end of the conquest had become a death sentence for anyone that was foolish enough to try it, which many who followed the faith of the Seven were. After Aegon's death, many parts of his new realm rose up in rebellion, but none were more vocal than the faith of the Seven. The dominant faith in Westeros claimed for the deposition of the abominable Targaryens after Aegon's successor wedded his son and daughter, and his other son, Maegor, took women to wife. Using this pretext, several houses from the Riverlands, Westerlands, and the Reach rebelled against the throne and aligned with the Fae. Vhagar showed those traitors the price of treason by burning many of their seats with Visenya Targaryen. Houses Tarek, Deddings, Leicester, Blaintree, Wayne, and many others saw their ancestral seats of power go up in smoke. The threat of her and Balerion's flames destroying the Starry Sept is what ended the larger part of that conflict. Thereafter, Vhagar garnered a black reputation. Upon Visenya's death, Vhagar remained riderless for nearly 3 decades. During this time, not only did she grow in ferocity, she also grew in size. Matching Balerion in size and reputation, can Vermithor kill Vhagar? Vhagar was claimed once before the timeline of House of the Dragon, about 50 years before Viserys' coronation, by none other than his own Lord Father, Balon. Prince Balon the Brave only used the Queen of Destruction as an instrument of war on one notable occasion. Alongside Jaehaerys and his elder brother Aemon, ended the Fourth Dornish War before it began. Vhagar, Vermithor, and Caraxes laid waste to the entire Dornish fleet, assembled in secret for over a year in a single night, and they did it without losing a single man. When Balon died, Vhagar became riderless once again, until she was claimed a decade and a half later by Laena Velaryon. When Balerion died in 94 AC, Vhagar became the last dragon from before Aegon's conquest, and also the largest. However, she wasn't as big as the Black Dread. That changed by the time Lady Laena bonded with her, because by the end of her life, Vhagar was said to be as large as Balerion had been at the time of the conquest, and this was certainly true by the time Prince Aemon Targaryen claimed the Queen of Destruction. It's not like the Black Dread hadn't grown since he helped his legendary First Master secure his kingdom. Balerian's skull could fit an entire mammoth down its gullet, which are far larger than men on horses in terms of height. But a dragon size can also work against, we've learnt during the course of House of the Dragon. The series and its source material, Fire and Blood, both emphasize that while dragons can technically keep growing limitlessly without food, freedom, and fire, they actually shouldn't. Beyond a certain point, their massive body proportions would start working against them, and they turn into behemoths whose wings can't support their own weight. Moreover, signs of aging start appearing on their bodies, like their scales turning more brittle and brutally overgrown, and their necks sagging thanks to their age. In House of the Dragon, Vhagar doesn't look like a bronze dragon at all. If anything, she looks sea green, and there's a reason for that. Oxidization. Centuries of exposure to oxygen and intense levels of heat have turned most of Vhagar's naturally bronze scales patina green. And with her eyes being green as well, you can't figure out where the bronze is supposed to be. She has also been compared to a bomber plane in terms of her current flight stability, because it takes Vhagar a lot of effort to take off and land given her frame. She also has many holes in her wings thanks to decades of going up against crossbows and scorpion, but that becomes a moot point when she's in the air and snapping her diamond-hard black teeth at you, which are as long as full-length swords. The most important thing about her is that she can still fight pretty much effortlessly, which is where the Balerion comparisons become more accurate. During the Dance of the Dragons, Vhagar alone was such a threat that both sides' plans hinged upon her involvement. Greens knew that wherever they deployed her, she would control the airspace, and the Blacks knew that they needed to prevent that from happening at all costs. But such things are easier said than done. Vhagar fires the first shot of the dance, much like she did with Aegon's conquest, by descending upon and murdering Arrax and its rider Lucerys in a replay of the battle beneath the God's Eye. The TV show made it look like Aemond lost control of her actions and was only trying to scare Luke into running off, but when Arrax fought back, Vhagar decided to end both Dragon and Dragon Rider. It was a cool little detail that shows you just how unpredictable the power of dragons truly is, because the books make it seem like Aemon deliberately targeted and remorselessly killed Luke with Vhagar, whereas the show's version of events are likely closer to the truth. Once that's accomplished, she goes on to win one of the most critical battles of the series in the Battle of Rook's Rest. This dragon fight involves 3 dragons in Sunfire, Meleys, and Vhagar, but only the latter emerges unscathed. For the rest of the dance, she spends her time terrorizing the Riverlands with Aemond, raising many of Rhaenyra's most crucial supporters to the ground. The question that's on every person's mind at this time is which dragon will be powerful enough to take her out, and there are many dragon candidates that are eligible, we're not gonna lie. The wild dragons, Cannibal and Sheepstealer, are close to Vhagar in size, with the former possibly being older than her. Meleys could give her a good run for her money if they fought in a one-on-one scenario, and so could Caraxes for that matter. But what fans really want to know is whether Vermithor will be able to defeat Vhagar. The Bronze Fury is without a doubt one of the most powerful dragons that's still alive during the House of the Dragon timeline, and Vermithor's size and youth are certainly an advantage for him. He was born after the conquest, grew rapidly, a creature that rivals Vhagar's size. You all saw Daemon singing to Vermithor. Tell us he didn't look at least 3/4 of Vhagar's size. He's also practically half her age, which puts him in his fighting prime. Vhagar might be as big as Balerion now, but she's clearly reaching her age limit. The fact that taking off and landing is a difficulty for her is a clear sign of that. If the Bronze Fury were to meet the Queen of Destruction in a dragon's fight, he might stand a solid chance. The biggest determining factor in this scenario is the fact that a dragon fights alongside its rider, and Vhagar's rider is far more experienced with the temperament than Vermithor's will prove to be. Hugh Hammer, the dragon seed we see in Season 2, is a great warrior, isn't exactly a wily tactician, and he certainly isn't smart enough to understand the intricacies of a thing as mysterious as the dragon bond. If Aemond were riding Vhagar in her engagement with Vermithor, she would come out on top without question, despite having disobeyed him in the finale of Season 1. The fact of the matter is that while the Blacks have a lot of dragons on their side, most of the riders are not as experienced as Aemond and his brother. Aegon has been flying Sunfire for over a decade, and though Aemond's time with Vhagar has been short, he managed to subdue and tame the largest and most willful Targaryen dragon of his time. That and 5+ years of time together have made them a lethal combination that those who have no experience fighting on Dragonback have no business engaging. The only person in the Blacks camp that is used to fighting on Dragonback is Daemon Targaryen, which neatly brings us to our final segment for the video. How will the world's largest dragon die in House of the Dragon? The Dance of the Dragons is about to get more convoluted than Season 8 of Game of Thrones, but that's going to be by design this time. Many dragons and dragon riders' allegiances will switch by the end, so we'll try giving you guys a hypothetical here to make you understand just how terribly Aemond ends up using Vhagar. Before the dragon seeds are sown, the Blacks have 5 dragons under their command, as opposed to the Greens' 3. Okay, make that 2, because Dreamfire is practically useless. We still don't know if Tessarion will show up or not, so we don't want to include her in our count just yet. The Blacks will end up adding at least 3 more dragons to their ranks, bringing their total up to 8 post-sowing. Had the Greens been on top of things like espionage and tactics, they would have realistically ended their enemies with just Sunfire and Vhagar. Rhaenyra and Rhaenys aren't warriors, Jace and Baela are extremely young dragon riders, and Daemon is their only true threat. Aemond is correct in identifying this fact, but extremely wrong in approaching it. Instead of focusing on securing his brother's crown, he wants to be the one that kills Daemon, because that to him will be the end of the war. This is why he burns the Trident and the Riverlands with Vhagar, leading his uncle on a wild goose chase for several months in the books. It's said that the number of people Aemond kills with Vhagar rivals the size of a giant army, and their joint efforts make the Trident run blood red for several days. In the end, Daemon has to call out his nephew and wait for a fortnight before he finally decided to show up. Vhagar and Caraxes engaged in a battle for the ages, but only the 2 of them could have had the fight they had. Daemon Targaryen has spent most of his life riding Caraxes. He's flown him longer than Aemond has been alive. The Bloodworm is said to be 3/4 of Vhagar's size, and we can believe that claim after seeing him in House of the Dragon. With his size and his rider's immense experience as a true Valyrian warrior are what will end up killing Vhagar. Daemon has far more control over Caraxes than Aemond has over Vhagar. The first season emphasized the fact that the Rogue Prince and his Bloodworm were one and the same. Caraxes, being far younger and far more in sync with its rider, will result in a scene that we don't want to spoil for show casuals, but those who have read the books will know it's going to be one of the most epic scenes in the series. Okay, we'll give you one little hint. Caraxes does to Vhagar what she did to Arrax, except he doesn't snap her neck in half because it's way too thick for that to happen. This isn't to discredit Vhagar though, because for her age, she gets more done than arguably any other Targaryen dragon in history, and that includes Balerion. Vhagar was crucial to the forging of the Seven Kingdoms and ensuring that it remained that way for over a century. She died 181 years old, the second oldest known dragon after Balerion. Her iron-tinged skull was displayed in the throne room of the Red Keep for several decades before Robert Baratheon took them down. He might have locked her remains up in a cellar, but the Stag King could never cleanse the world of Vhagar's impact. The Bronze Death was by far the most important dragon in the history of House Targaryen, being a catalyst in both its rise and fall. Marvelous verdict! Vhagar is definitely going to be the centerpiece of Season 2 of House of the Dragon, especially on the green side. The Bronze Dragon is the only one that lived across 3 centuries, and we have the privilege of seeing her final years play out on our screens. She was a veteran of 4 major wars, 100 battles, and her flames caused the deaths of thousands of enemies of House Targaryen. All of her accomplishments were only possible because of her anatomy and the fact that she was given enough time and space to fill it out to its maximum potential, which is more than we can say for the Dragon Pit generation of Targaryen dragons. But that's just our opinion. We'd like to know yours. Let us know what you thought about Vhagar and her fearsome anatomy down in the comments below. Let us know your favorite Vhagar moment, especially if it's something we missed in this video. And if you enjoyed the video, like it and share it with your fellow Game of Thrones fans because it's dragon season here at Marvelous Videos, and we'll be making House of the Dragon content all summer long. We hope to see you soon, but until then, take care and keep one eye on the sky.